Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of the first episode of Season 2 of Star Trek Discovery. And what the hell was that? I think it actually made me laugh more than the Orville did because it was unintentionally hilarious in some places, especially the beginning with the little evil Spock child painting holographic snakes and then slamming the door in the face of Michael. It was all so ridiculous, it kind of made me laugh. And there were all the obvious deliberate jokes trying to imitate the Orville, like the scene with the alien guy in the elevator sneezing on everyone. And those deliberate attempts at humor were not that funny. And I think the music was way too loud all throughout the episode. I could barely hear what anyone was saying. And they suddenly turned Tilly into a total comic relief weirdo. She wasn't like this previously. They seemed to dial up her strangeness up to 11 to make her funnier, I guess. And she's definitely not command material if she can't even make a coherent sentence. This is like Barkley but magnified by 100. I don't even get how she was accepted into the academy, much less why she was posted on the most important ship in the fleet with all this secret technology, if she's this kind of a bubbling idiot. And remember, this is the same woman who allowed a wanted fugitive to roam freely on the ship and then beamed her back to her planet without letting anyone know. In the short Trek episode, maybe it didn't actually happen yet, since it's not clear when that took place. Maybe it's happening later, but still I don't even get why she's in Starfleet, much less on the most important ship. I guess maybe Lorca brought her there, just like he brought Michael there. Maybe because he knew her in the mirror universe. Maybe he knew that she's a captain there and she's a badass, and so maybe that's why he brought her to Discovery. And also apparently she's now running the whole ship. She's giving orders to officers where they're posted and stuff like that. Who the hell gave her this job? So it feels like they're trying to forcefully push more comedy into the show to make it more like the Orville, and if it's done too forcefully and artificially, it's not that good. And I actually laughed more at the unintentional comedy of the first scene with the evil Spock child, because it just seems so ridiculous, and also, as I predicted, they're trying to ruin the character of Spock now, because, you know, in the past, Spock was the hero, and so whenever they showed his childhood, he was the victim of bullying, and here they suddenly show that he's the bully. He's bullying Michael as a kid. He doesn't accept Michael, he envies Michael. They're adding all this tension, which might be a good drama later, but it's kind of creepy, to be honest. Trying to make Spock seem kind of evil, even though in the very end of the episode they did kind of turn it around, so I'll get to that. So anyway, they met the Enterprise and Captain Pike comes on board. I did like the fact that they had the uniforms which look much more similar to the original series, so I guess they explained it away by saying that different ships have different uniforms, and after that he changes to the uniforms of Discovery. So I guess it's a step in the right direction of trying to fit it better with continuity. But of course in other places of the episode they did stuff which does not fit continuity. I'll get to that. As for Pike, I did kind of like him. He's charismatic. And one thing that bugged me in the episode is that I assume that Captain Pike wants the Discovery specifically because it has the spore drive. I assume that he wants the spore drive to get to those other signals in the other sides of the galaxy, and the Discovery is the only ship that will be able to do that, but apparently that's not the reason. He just needs a normal ship with a normal warp drive, so that's kind of disappointing. And also it seems they just gave up on the spore drive with no real reason given. Such an amazing technology and no one cares about it anymore, not even its inventor who wants to leave. And they say that they just put all that stuff in storage and they forget about it. So is that why Starfleet didn't know about this technology later? So this is ridiculous beyond words. And also a missed opportunity, because that was the perfect excuse for why Pike would want to take over the Discovery specifically, because it has the spore drive that will enable it to reach places that other ships cannot reach. And other things that annoyed me is that the show is still imitating the JJ movies even more so now. They're doubling down on that kind of style. And I don't necessarily have a problem with the visual effects, some of them were good, but my problem is that it makes everything look stupid. For example, in that scene when they drop out of warp, they immediately collide with asteroids. And it looked exactly like in the JJ movie in Star Trek 2009, and it all looks stupid because, you know, in the old shows they had the rule of not going to warp inside solar systems. They only went it at much slower than light impulse speeds. And it was mentioned specifically in many episodes of Star Trek that they do not jump into warp inside the solar system for this reason, as not to collide with something. And also they always had sensors and could see what's in front of them in all the old Star Trek shows. And yet in the JJ movies and now in this show, apparently warp is like hyperspace in Star Wars, and apparently you cannot collide with anything while in hyperspace. And also they give the command to get out of warp and then they immediately drop right at their target. So what if we gave that command a second later? So would they have collided with all those rocks? So it just feels stupid, and it's not the way that warp drives worked in the old rules of Star Trek. And it also defies common sense. I mean, why cannot they see what's in front of them before they reach it? I mean, they always had view screens which could show them what's in front of them, even at warp. And now it's like they're flying blind, they cannot know what's in front of them before they drop out of warp, and whenever they give the command to drop out of warp, they immediately appear right at the place they want, right on top of it. Why not drop out of warp in a distance so you could see what's going on before you suddenly find yourself there? And so that kind of stuff is really stupid, and so that pisses me off. Not because of the visuals themselves are fine, they're kind of jumbled but they're fine, but it makes no sense, and so it's stupid, and so I cannot ignore this kind of stupidity. So I guess they were just lucky that they dropped off from warp a few meters away from colliding into all that mess. In the old Star Trek shows, they always dropped from warp to impulse in advance before they reach the place they want to reach. So it makes sense, right, to drop out of warp far away from your target and then approach it slowly with impulse to know what's in front of you. And here they drop right at the final point, not even scanning what's ahead of them apparently, and almost colliding with all that stuff. Now, as for Captain Pike, he is charismatic but also a little bit annoying. He brags about failing astronomy in the academy. But wait, how the hell did he finish the academy then? Wouldn't you have to pass that course to graduate the academy if you want to be a Starfleet captain? And then he starts quoting the Bible and stuff like that. Isn't this supposed to be after all the reshoots? I heard the rumors that they had to reshoot a bunch of these episodes because the original version was deemed unwatchable by a test audience, and they said that Pike was extremely religious and he prayed before every decision and stuff like that. So we don't really see that, but we do see him kind of quoting the Bible. You know, part of me wishes to see that original version because that might be unintentionally funny as well. That might be comedy gold. Because, you know, I love bad movies which are so bad they are funny, and so part of me wishes to see the original version, in which Pike was supposed to be a religious zealot who prays before every decision. So I guess we only see small parts of it here in this final version, and it does feel unwatchable in places. The way they edited everything, it was sometimes so jumbled and messed up, and they made all kinds of design alterations of the ship. They show how the turbolift moves and everything looks like a giant factory. So that also reminds me of the JJ movies, which show the inside of the Enterprise, which they actually filmed inside some factories. So there's a lot of empty spaces in the ship, and it just feels wrong, and it doesn't seem to fit what we saw of the ship earlier. And also the ship is not really that big from the outside to make it believable that it has all those empty spaces and all that factory kind of structure inside the ship. And it looks like a giant roller coaster ride inside empty parts of the ship and all that stuff. And you know, I made a video once comparing Star Wars to Star Trek, and one of my complaints about Star Trek was that all the sets are too small, that we don't really see the size of the ship, that we only see small rooms and all that stuff. So I always wanted to see starships which are much bigger with a lot more room in them, like in Star Wars. So that's something I actually praise Star Wars for. So I'm fine with that being done in Star Trek. I do think that would be much cooler to have bigger ships with much bigger spaces inside them for a lot of cool stuff. But we cannot do it retroactively. We cannot suddenly reveal that parts of the ship are so huge and gigantic with all these structures when it doesn't fit logically what we saw before and how the ship looks from the outside. I mean, there's that scene in which they go into the shuttle bay and suddenly it's revealed it has that rotating door leading to under the shuttle bay, and then they go into these pods and they fly outside of the ship, but first they have to go through all these tunnels, which does look visually very cool. It's very entertaining visually, but it doesn't make sense. I mean, they are in the shuttle bay, which is on the very edge of the ship, so it's only a few meters to go out of the ship. So why then, when we see them going through all these tunnels, why does it all seem so long? Like the ship looks much bigger in the inside than it is on the outside. So logically it doesn't make sense, and that's annoying to me. The visual style itself is kind of fun, but it doesn't fit everything we know previously, and of course continuity, which I always complain about. This is now ruined beyond repair. You cannot explain this away. It doesn't fit at all to the canon of the old Star Trek, no matter what they say, because no one had this kind of technology before. All these spacesuits which cover them automatically and stuff like that. It all looks like Power Rangers or Iron Man and all kinds of superheroes. All the way they did that, it all looks like a superhero show, basically, which again, I'm fine with it if it's a superhero show, but it's not Star Trek. It doesn't fit Star Trek, it's not the style of Star Trek. Why couldn't they simply take a normal shuttle to those debris? Why even the need to go into these elaborate bubble ships, which by the way were ripped off from the movie Lost in Space? They had exactly the same kind of vessels there, sitting inside glass spheres, which again does look cool, but we never saw anything like that in Star Trek. They are ripping off other movies again. for the 50th time probably. I made videos of that on my other channel showing compilations and comparisons with other movies. This show is always ripping off other movies visually, and so now they're ripping off Lost in Space. So this entire sequence kind of reminds me of X-Men, Power Rangers, the animated Batman show, you know, the part in which they go through that tunnel in high speed before they go out of the ship. And also it rips off the JJ movies, which had very similar kind of scenes of them doing space jumps and go through debris and have to navigate, and it's all action-packed, and it's all very flashy, very cool-looking and all that stuff, but it doesn't really make sense. I mean, why do they even need the bubble ships? If it's for field of vision, then why not simply put a view screen on the inside, and also they have all these holograms, so why would they even need the bubble? Except for making it look cool by having us see them from the outside. And also I guess to add tension, because you know Pike has his spot damaged and you see the glass about to break and stuff like that. So it's fun visually, but it's stupid. It doesn't really make sense if you think about it. And of course it doesn't fit continuity, because suddenly they have these super advanced Iron Man kind of suits. And of course Michael saves everybody again because she's the best at everything. So of course now she's the best pilot as well. And she saves Pike, who is about to die. So Pike only lived later thanks to Michael, remember that. And she disobeys orders to save him. And it's almost point to point with Lost in Space. If you watch the first scene of Lost in Space, you have the guy in the bubble ship about to crash, and then the hero disobeys orders to save him, and he risks himself to save him. I always feel deja vu when I watch Star Trek Discovery, because it seems to be ripping off so many other movies and shows, and all the similarities with the JJ movies, which were not that old. I mean, if you remake an old idea that is decades old and you improve upon it, fine, but they don't really improve upon any of these scenes. The JJ movies, which were not that old, they were only a few years ago, so it's still fresh in our minds, and now we have scenes which are exactly a copy of that. Remember that scene in which Sulu was falling down and then Kirk jumped after him to save him, and then he caught him in mid-air and they were both spinning? We have the exact same kind of scene here, and so once again I'm feeling deja vu when I watch this. Why should I watch this show if I can just watch the older ones to see the exact same kind of stuff? Is it really that hard to come up with some kind of new action scene which was not done before? And if they're ripping off the old Star Trek movies, why can't they rip off some of the better ones, some of the ones with the good stories, some of the ones with the good character moments, or some kind of story? Maybe it would be more interesting than just ripping off the visual style. I mean, if you really think about it, and this is a bit of criticism to the JJ movies, which I did enjoy in many ways, but my criticism was that it's all basically action-packed adventure without any actual story. And what do you really remember from it? I mean, if you think about what's your favorite movie, usually you would remember a movie which made you think about something, which inspired you in some way, which had some kind of story that left you thinking about it later. When you pick your favorite movies, I'm sure you wouldn't just pick the movie which had the best action scene, which was a lot of fun, but it's not really something to think about later. At least for me, when I think about my favorite movies, I think about movies with a good story, good characters, which had some kind of point to it. I don't just think about what was the coolest visually, the one with the best action scenes. So that was my criticism of the JJ movies, and now of this show, which is all a lot of fun visually, but no real story except for the action. As for the special effects themselves, some of them were good, but in some places it was all jumbled up too much. And the way this whole episode was edited, it was kind of all happening too fast, you could barely keep up with it. And usually I love a faster paced movie, I don't like a boring dragged out movie. And yet in this episode it all felt a little bit too rushed. For example, there was a scene on the bridge in which that black officer is told to open hailing frequencies to that ship which crashed in the asteroids, and then before he even presses on the buttons he starts to say there's no response. And he waited exactly 0.1 seconds before saying that. That also kind of made me laugh unintentionally, because it kind of reminded me of all those times that Lieutenant Worf also didn't really wait long before saying no response. Whenever he was told to hail another ship, he always waited half a second and said no response. But this guy here says that before even finishing pressing the buttons. And by the way, Saru suddenly has the vision of Geordi LaForge. Suddenly his eyes are so superior that he can enhance the image he sees on the screen. And I'm like, wait, can't the computer do that? Are you really telling me that your super advanced ship's computer cannot enhance the image on the screen, but Saru can? And what's up with that guy with the visor in the transporter room? Suddenly they have a LaForge looking guy. Is he blind or what? I mean, they never explain all these minor characters with all kinds of gadgets, and yet they never really explore any of that. They don't explain to us what's any of it about. So there's a robot lady on the bridge, and there was a woman with a robot head in the first episodes in the previous season, and there are guys with all kinds of stuff on their heads, and they never explain any of it. Are they all cyborgs or what? They never explain any of these minor characters. I mean, all the background crew, they look more like the Borg than Starfleet officers. They all have all kinds of implants, they have robotic body parts. I mean, I guess we can explain it because it's all after the war, so maybe there were a lot of injured people from the war, and so they were implanted with replacements. I mean, that's how they explain that chick who sits at the helm, who I don't remember her name even because they never explore her character. She's just on the bridge. At least they explained her appearance because in the first episode she looked normal, then there was that explosion on the bridge, and then later she appeared with that stuff on her head, so we can assume that it's because of her injury. But we saw other crew members back in peacetime before the war, and already we saw people with robotic stuff on their heads without ever explaining it, so it's kind of weird in my opinion. Also all kinds of weird haircuts, like that black woman on the bridge who again I don't remember her name, it's something strange. So they seem to be trying to be edgy and cool looking and all that stuff, but without ever explaining any of it, and so that's annoying. Why not explore some of these minor characters? Just give them a few lines, not on the bridge, you know, meet them in the mess hall, give them a few lines and get to know them a little bit, and then we'll get to know what's all that cool stuff on them. And you know, the war with the Klingons is a good excuse to explain away all that kind of weirdness. You can have all this stuff, I'm not against that. I simply want them to explain it, don't just show it in the background without ever explaining it. That's kind of annoying in my opinion. So we have the guy in the transporter room with a LaForge kind of visor, and in one scene we see a guy in a wheelchair in the corridor, and he seems to be driving it manually. He seems to spin the wheels with his hands. Wouldn't they have more advanced wheelchairs at this time? Maybe he wants to train his arms, I guess. I'm not against seeing the guys in the wheelchair and all that stuff, that's cool. I said before when I reviewed one of the episodes of the Orville, I mentioned an episode of Deep Space Nine which was about a woman from a planet with low gravity, and so she had to use a wheelchair when interacting with other Starfleet personnel, and I said that's a very nice episode to show that even people with disabilities can still contribute. That's a very nice idea, and it was not done again in Star Trek except that one episode. And so I'm perfectly fine with even having a main character be disabled and stuff like that. That would be perfectly cool, but they don't really do that. They only show such guys in the background just to show that they're there, but not giving them any lines or anything. So I wish they would explore it a little bit more, that kind of stuff. Another funny thing, when they had that action sequence in space, they killed off that annoying guy right away. What I found funny is that he was wearing a blue shirt. There was another woman there who was wearing a red shirt, and they made a point to mention that specifically so that we'll think that she's going to die, but then instead they killed off the guy in the blue shirt. So I guess that's a clever twist to surprise us. Again, that's a joke that was done in the JJ movie when they jumped down to that platform and then the guy wearing the red got killed off right away. That actually did make me laugh. I actually loved that joke in that movie because it's kind of a nod to the original series in which the guys wearing the red were always getting killed off on away missions. So that was a joke I actually loved in the JJ movie. So they seem to be setting up a similar kind of joke, but then surprised us by killing off the guy in the blue instead of the guy in the red. The only thing annoying in this whole scene is the fact that once again Michael is the perfect one who saves everybody. She risks herself to save everybody. That's a little bit annoying because she's a too perfect character. And again, this is not a superhero show. This is supposed to be a show about a team effort, with everybody contributing, everyone having some ability which is necessary for the situation, not just one person who is a know-it-all who can do everything himself or herself. So that's the problem with the Michael character. She's too good at everything, just the bestest person ever, and even bragging about it. She says, oh, I know how to pilot these. So of course she's the one to save Pike. Why not do the opposite for a change? Why not have her be the one in trouble and Pike be the one who saves her? It's always her saving everybody. It will be the same with Spock, I'm sure, in later episodes. I'm sure she'll be the one who saves Spock, and she will fix him both mentally and physically, and she will make him into the Spock we know. Alex Kurtzman already said in interviews that's what's going to happen. He said that Michael is the one who will turn him into the Spock that we knew. So she will be much better than him. She will be the role model for Spock. So that kind of stuff is annoying. Why not shake it up a little bit, have someone else save her for a change? Actually, later in the episode, Pike does come back to save her. So I guess they did do that later. And they show the Red Angel thing, and I assume the Red Angel will be the one to save her, and yet the Red Angel didn't actually do anything, she just saw it. So what was the point of that exactly? Seemed kind of pointless. And when they were on that asteroid, they met that new engineer lady, which I guess is supposed to be kind of like McCoy, only again dialed up to 11. She's kind of cursing like there's no tomorrow and being totally nuts. But I kind of like her. She was kind of funny, and it also reminded me of Rick from Rick and Morty, kind of a crazy scientist genius who is totally nuts and rude and all that kind of stuff. And she saved her crew members by hooking their organs up in machines and all kinds of crazy stuff. So it really reminded me of Rick and Morty. So I'm curious to see what they'll do with that character, because she did seem kind of fun in a kind of comedic way, and I'm fine with that kind of humor. And she's obviously supposed to be like a McCoy type, and someone even says to her, but you're an engineer, not a doctor. So I'm like, oh, that's really subtle, very subtle. And later in the Ready Room, we see Pike picking up a note from one of Lorca's fortune cookies, and it says, not every cage is a prison, not every loss eternal. And this is just such an amazing coincidence that this fortune cookie note that he happened to find fits exactly what happens to Pike later in the old show. So this is just so subtle, very subtle. I mean, this is supposed to be like a foreshadowing for his character, but it doesn't really work because we already know what happens with him later. And that's also why we knew that he's not going to die in the asteroid field, so there was no real tension toward his life. And that's exactly the problem with prequels. And if you do a prequel, then at least put in danger those characters that you don't know their fate, those that might actually die. But putting Pike in danger doesn't really work, and doing this kind of foreshadowing, it was a little bit too obvious. So this kind of made me roll my eyes, and I don't think it's very clever. Also, isn't this supposed to be taking place after the cage? I guess it foreshadows his future in the wheelchair and all that stuff. So fine, I don't have a huge problem with this, but it feels kind of too on the nose, not subtle at all. And also they told us that the Enterprise was not in the war, that it was ordered to stay away from the war, and it doesn't really make sense. I mean, it would make sense if they say that the ship was simply very far away on a long-range mission, and so it simply didn't have enough time to go back in time for the war. That would make much more sense, but they say specifically that it was ordered to stay away, so it doesn't really make sense. Why wouldn't Starfleet want this powerful ship to help defend the Federation? So it didn't make sense. I actually think they should have done the opposite. They should have said that the Enterprise was involved in combat with Klingons just before the ceasefire started, and maybe it was heavily damaged by the Klingons, and that's why it's so broken in this episode. They could even use that to explain its different appearance. They could say that all its hull platings are missing and would have to be renewed, and then we can imagine that it looked like the original Enterprise before this, and it will look like that again once it's repaired, and so that would be a neat way to explain the visual differences. And what I was mostly dreading is that they will show us the inside of the Enterprise, and I was almost screaming at the screen, no, don't you dare go there, don't go to that ship, don't show us the inside of the Enterprise, you will ruin the continuity even more, no, 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 and suddenly she's there. And of course everything looks exactly like on Discovery, the same kind of corridor, only with different colors, but the same design. At least they didn't show us the bridge of that ship, otherwise I would say they are deliberately trying to piss off all the old Star Trek fans. So at least they didn't do that, but they did show us the corridor, and then they showed us the inside of Spock's quarters. And it does create a continuity problem because, not because it's not the same quarters, I mean we can assume it's a different room that he later reassigned to a different room on the ship, that's fine. But the fact that they showed that his room is so huge, that is a continuity problem because it was specifically mentioned by Scotty when he appeared in TNG in the episode Relics and he was given guest quarters. He specifically said that this is so huge that they never had quarters like that in his days. He said that even an admiral never got quarters that big on the old ships. And yet here we see Spock's quarters looking much bigger than any quarters on the Enterprise D. And so that creates once again a continuity issue, not just with the visual style, but contradicting specific dialogue that was said by the characters. So if you rewatch that episode with Scotty in TNG, his dialogue would not make much sense, because now we see Spock's quarters on the Enterprise and they look so huge, and yet later Scotty says that no one ever had quarters that big in the old ships. And by the way, in that episode he also went to the holodeck and he seemed not to know what a holodeck is. He said to the computer, the android at the bar told me you could show me my old ship. So he seemed to know about the holodeck only from data, so holodecks did not exist in his time, otherwise he would know the computer is able to do that. When the door opened, we saw the exact same set as in the original series, which they actually reconstructed specifically for that episode, and they were faithful to continuity and showing it looking exactly like it did before, not trying to reimagine it, and yet this show is reimagining everything. And I'm not that much against the visual reimagining, but you have to make it fit the dialogue at least. You cannot simply change everything. And it's funny how Kurtzman said that everybody is always trying to maintain continuity, but it's impossible. No, I don't think it's impossible. I think you're just lazy. I don't think you care about the old continuity. You want to erase the old one. And that's why you're pissing off all the old Star Trek fans. You're not giving respect to any of the original material. And probably Spock will get ruined later. We see in the end of the episode, we see a trailer of the next episode, and we see that Spock will be in a mental institute, and he'll be writing on the floor, and he'll attack the doctor and the guards, and he will beat everybody up. I made a long video explaining why Spock was such a popular character, and one of the things I said there was that it showed him as being such a badass because he didn't have to resort to punches and kicks. He simply grabbed someone by the shoulder and put him to sleep right away, so he seemed to be kind of more enlightened and more badass because of that. And so in that scene that we see him in the mental institute, he is using the nerve pinch, and yet after that he immediately does use the kicks and punches and all of that. He's attacking the doctor or the nurse and then the guards, he's beating them up with kicks and punches, and so that's not the Spock we knew. That's not the same character, and of course he's going to be crazy and all of that, and of course Michael will be the one to save him and fix him and solve the mystery and all of that, which will be extremely annoying. Maybe they'll surprise me, I guess we'll wait and see. Maybe it will be good, but so far it's pretty terrible and it's kind of ridiculous. I did kind of like the very end of the episode in which Michael goes into Spock's room and she's having flashbacks of the time that she went into his room as a kid, and I guess she was so traumatized by that first encounter with kid Spock that she's still having PTSD flashbacks to it 30 years later. But then she finds out only now that the only reason he was drawing all those monsters was because he was told to draw the things that he's scared of. So I guess for 30 years she didn't know all of that until now. Only now she realizes that. And up until now she always thought about him as that scary kid who was drawing those dragon snakes. And only now she finds out that he was actually scared of them himself. So I did like the revelation, but it doesn't really make sense that only now she finds that out. I guess it's too bad she never bothered to ask him about it, and she had to dig through his personal logs to find that out. And she also finds out that he had visions of these red signals months before they actually appeared, and that's why he took a long vacation. I guess it's too bad his captain never bothered to dig through his logs to find out what's going on. I guess he respected his privacy, unlike Michael. And in the next episode we'll see him in the nut house attacking doctors and guards, because why the hell not? Why not ruin Spock, who is a beloved iconic character for over 50 years? Let's Luke Skywalker him to make Michael look better. So no, I don't like this storyline. It's way too similar to The Last Jedi, and there was even a line that Stamets said. He said something like, "No one is ever truly gone." So I guess these writers have been watching The Last Jedi and liked it, and they're trying to imitate it now. So I guess it's going to be a total disaster, but we'll wait and see. I am curious to see what they'll do with that. And if it's bad, at least I'll laugh at that. At least it will be unintentional comedy to me. Because all the bad stuff and all the craziness and all the silly stuff kind of made me laugh. So I found that comedic. So that's my thoughts about this episode. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below, and we can discuss it in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, please subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.